Hey, welcome to Overlooked, a podcast with a point of view that women's health cannot wait. If you want more of that point of view and the backstory to this episode, sign up for my newsletter at overlookedpod.com. That's overlookedpod.com. Okay, I'm going for a walk and I'm taking you with me. Walking is how I survive menopause. I walk to think and I walk to not think. I walk to feel and to not feel, to make meaning of my life. And then sometimes the walk is just a walk. This is Overlooked. I'm Golda Arthur, and I think you can tell by now this is going to be a different episode than what you normally hear. So if you've been listening to Overlooked, you know that I am 50 years old and I am in surgical menopause. I had my ovaries and fallopian tubes removed to keep myself from getting cancer. For reasons that would be a whole other episode, I did not start taking hormone therapy until about 12 months after that surgery. And it was kind of disastrous for me. I'm now coming up to a year on hormone replacement therapy, and the difference is night and day. In this time, of course, I did what I do, and I asked a lot of other people what was their experience of menopause. And you know what? I'm kind of blown away by the fact that no two menopauses are the same. And that variety and diversity of experience, that to me is overlooked. That's something we're not talking about enough in menopause. So in this episode, you're going to hear 3 different perspectives on menopause. Samantha Gattsek in the US.
I feel so incredibly grateful and so lucky that really my life does not feel like it has changed. Along with that, though, is honestly there is some guilt.
Robyn Watt in Canada.
When I asked them about this, early onset menopause, they said that there just isn't enough research done on how chemotherapy affects women in particular and the reproductive system. And there really wasn't much they could do for me other than to see if it would reverse in 6 months to a year or just kind of settle down on its own.
And Lauren Chiren in the UK.
I got to the point where my self-esteem and self-confidence was at an all-time low. And rather than being seen as weak or as vulnerable or not able to do my job, I actually made the decision to leave my job.
Regardless of where you are, if you're listening to this and you want to share your story about something overlooked in menopause, send me an email or a voice memo. hello@overlookedpod.com is the email address. So share your story with the show. Hey everyone, I wanted to let you know about a podcast that I think you'll really enjoy listening to. Made for Us is hosted by Tosin Suleiman and explores how thoughtful design can help create a better world for everyone. One of my favorite episodes explores how women have long been overlooked in car safety design. It's called Where is the Female Crash Test Dummy? Where indeed. And you learn why crash safety testing still relies heavily on male data and why we can do better. Tosin speaks with a couple of safety experts, including Swedish professor Astrid Linder, who developed the first crash test dummy based on the average woman's body. But guess what? Today, there's still no commercial version on the market, if you can believe that. So take a listen to this episode. I'm sure that you will enjoy it as much as I did. You'll find it by searching for Made for Us wherever you listen to podcasts. Now, back to the show. Let's get started with Samantha Gattsek.
Hello, Overlooked. This is my menopause story. It starts back in beginning of 2024. I very suddenly and kind of unexpectedly found out that I had the BRCA1 genetic mutation just a couple days before my 39th birthday, which I feel like in some ways was a blessing because I feel like I was spared many years of anxiety about it. It just kickstarted a whole whirlwind of doctor's appointments and, I had to make some very big choices about what I wanted to do with my reproductive organs and my reproductive health fairly quickly. I didn't feel pressured to do anything, but everybody was like, before you're 40, before you're 40. And, that was not a lot of time. So in August of 2024, I had a hysterectomy, BSO, cervix removed, everything was removed. For me, the scariest part about the surgery was knowing that I was going to go into medically induced menopause. And just hearing all of the horror stories, I honestly felt like I was never going to be the same after it. I thought I would have hot flashes and insomnia and even more brain fog than I would normally have on a regular day. And I was, worried about my heart health and my bones, and just it was a lot of scary things that I didn't take the surgery lightly. Luckily, my doctors agreed that I was a good candidate for hormone replacement therapy afterwards, a little estrogen patch, which I started about a week after my surgery. The transition from pre-surgery to medically induced menopause was extremely smooth. It has now been a little over a year that I technically have been in menopause. And for me, the patch has worked extremely well in controlling any type of menopausal symptoms. I have not had a hot flash, have no more brain fog than I had before. I feel so incredibly grateful and so lucky that really my life does not feel like it has changed. Besides the fact that now twice a week I have to change out my estrogen patch, which is a pretty small price to pay. Along with that, though, is honestly, there is some guilt that I feel completely fine. A lot of my friends are suffering through perimenopause right now. They're in their early 40s. And, I feel bad that I am completely asymptomatic. I feel like myself before the surgery. I feel like nothing ever happened. And sometimes I feel guilty that I have this genetic mutation, but, I had the surgery and I don't really have to think about it. I still go through scans. We will see what happens over the next decade as they start to taper down the dosage of the estrogen. Maybe I'll be leaving you a different voicemail in a couple years, but thanks.
Hi, my name is Robyn, and I'm calling in from Ontario, Canada. I wanted to say thank you so much for your podcast. I've recently discovered it and been binging it because it's so good. And I think it's particularly resonating with me right now because I recently came through a diagnosis and chemotherapy treatment for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And I'm very fortunate to be in the clear now. But something that happened to me during this was that I was thrust very suddenly into chemotherapy-induced menopause at age 38. And the symptoms that I experienced with that, I believe, really affected my recovery because I was suddenly getting very intense night sweats. I had really severe insomnia and many other symptoms that I believe really affected my recovery on top of, just generally recovering from the disease and the treatment. And although I really trusted my oncology team and I felt very safe with them, I believe they gave me excellent care as much as they could throughout my treatment. When I asked them about this, early onset menopause, they said that there just isn't enough research done on how chemotherapy affects women in particular and the reproductive system. And there really wasn't much they could do for me other than to see if it would reverse in 6 months to a year or just kind of settle down on its own. They just didn't have much treatment they wanted to offer me or really any advice other than just to suffer through it for the next few months. And I was just really shocked about this because obviously women are approximately 50% of the population, just as likely to have to go through chemotherapy as men are. And how could this area have been, so blatantly missed when it comes to recovery from chemotherapy and cancer? Anyway, I just wanted to share my story with you, seeing as it's so in line with everything that you do. And just wanted to say thank you again. And I'm excited to keep listening.
Hi Golda, this is Lauren, CEO of Women of a Certain Stage. You've asked me to tell you the story of how I left my company due to my menopause symptoms. Absolutely. So at the time I was a senior exec in financial services. I was leading global transformation projects and programs, and I was loving the work that I was doing. I was a new mum and I was also sole parent. So everything was, everything was planned out within an nth degree. But there were a few occasions at work where perhaps I was finding that I was unable to speak up in a meeting because my throat was so tight with anxiety, I couldn't get any words out. Or another time when I was sitting in a meeting with a couple of other people, holding on the arms of a chair because my heart was beating out of my chest. I was having palpitations. And I had never experienced anything like that before, but I thought if I let go of the arms of the chair, I would fall on the floor. So over the course of about 18 months, I found that I was really beginning to question my own judgment and finding it harder to make decisions for my team, which when you're working in critical change management is really not really good at all. Sleep was fairly elusive, and I got to the point where my self-esteem and self-confidence was at an all-time low. And rather than being seen as weak or as vulnerable or not able to do my job, I actually made the decision to leave my job. I've got a really big background in anatomy and physiology and personal training, sports therapy, psychology, all sorts of things to do with human performance. And I left my job thinking I had early onset dementia. So it was a really weird thing to leave as a new mum in my early 40s, thinking that I might not ever be able to work again. And I think that that was really quite frightening. And it took until I'd been to see my doctor 3 times. And on the first appointment, he kind of talked to me about low mood. The second appointment, he did some blood tests. And on the third appointment, I was expecting to go back and for him to say to me, actually, you've got this long left before you have to, give someone else the responsibility for your decisions. So when he turned around and said to me, it's just menopause, I was the happiest menopausal woman in the UK. And I remember in that moment, the tissues that I had in my hand, I'd been dabbing the tears, expecting the worst news from him, was when I just looked at him in the eye and I said, I have to stop anyone else going through this. I have to make sure no other woman can go through this or leave their job thinking that something much more sinister is going on. And that was definitely a moment that shifted everything. And that hit me so hard. And I thought, this is more than just a biological phase. I realized people going through menopause are just part of a systemic issue, and that workplaces are just failing to acknowledge what menopause really is and how it can impact somebody's life. And so literally from that moment on, I knew I had to be part of the change. I had to help change the narrative of menopause, raise awareness of menopause, and help people have the tools that they need to support themselves and others. So whether you are, a born female at birth, a signed female at birth, go through puberty, have periods, and then ultimately go through menopause. So we will tend to say people rather than women when we talk about menopause. But there's so much that I've learned and so much conversation that needs to happen to really make workplaces menopause savvy and menopause supportive. So today I'm the founder and CEO of Women of a Certain Stage, very much an accidental CEO. It wasn't something I planned clearly, but we're an organisation dedicated to educating and supporting women and workplaces and people that go through menstrual cycles and have challenges and perimenopause and menopause. So it's really important to me that, we get the education out there. Not every organisation is ready to do this work, although more now than ever before. We have a free course as well called Menopause the Basics, and I run that live every 2 months. We may take that online at some point, but I like to keep it live to keep it current. And we've taken over 200,000 people through that so far. We've partnered with over 400 FTSE and Fortune 350 companies, and we've trained over 500 menopause coaches and champions so far. So my mission is to train 20,000 menopause coaches before I retire or die, whichever comes first. And I think that, there's still stigma around menopause. There's still a massive narrative that we need to change around menopause in professional spaces, but we can do it. And I'm seeing change happen. So yes, I've been doing this for a very long time, if a decade is a long time, and I will continue to do it and have as much impact as I can. I know what it feels like to lose your confidence, to feel that your self-esteem's on the floor. I know what it's like to have some really dark moments going through menopause. I know what it's like to feel isolated. And I'm really passionate about changing the narrative so that menopause is no longer something that we're ashamed of, that we're hiding away from, or something that derails careers.
Overlooked is an independent show, and we would love your support. We're building a community around women's health so that no one is overlooked. If you'd like to be part of it, hit the follow button on this podcast, wherever you're listening to this. Or you can show us some love by writing us a review and sharing this episode with someone. Overlooked is written and created by me, Golda Arthur. Jessica Martinez de Hoz is the show's producer. You can stay up to date with the show by signing up for the newsletter and following us on Instagram and LinkedIn. We read every review and email, so write to us. hello@overlookedpod.com. Thanks for listening.